Welcome to Tea Time, my friends, a place where I muse about my gender transition experience and in the process aim to comfort and inspire others to a greater level of self-awareness. I am Artemis, enjoying a cup of sencha matcha green tea blended with coconut milk, like a breakfast-style tea. And in this video, we're going to bring together and discuss the overlap between two different political legislation movements relating to the LGBT community: the banning of conversion therapy in Canada, and the proposed bill in Florida nicknamed by radical trans activists as the Don't Say Gay bill. Specifically, I'm going to be focusing on the bait and switch tactic of the radical activists who are taking advantage of the publicity on Canada's bill, which addresses something very, very different, and misrepresenting Florida's bill in order to manipulate public opinion for their agenda. More than just exposing this very flawed logic, I think it's important to realize that this reckless and unempathetic push by the radical trans activists is having a net negative effect, as other states in the US are proposing legislation that actually is harmful to the LGBT community as a whiplash response to protect the larger population, something that I've already talked about in my Sun Tzu video, link above. If moderate LGBT do not stand up and oppose the radicals within their community, we will go down with them when the majority population gets fed up with the lack of respect. So let's briefly go over the important details of these bills so we can frame the conversation, and then I'm going to be discussing a 4-minute long news clip covering the Don't Say Gay bill that showcases all these logical fallacies and manipulation tactics the far left uses. So first, the bills. Canada already had restrictions in place regarding conversion therapy, which was Bill C6, but these latest amendments adopted going into January of 2022 expressly prohibit the practice of conversion therapy, which they define as attempting to counsel someone to change their sexual orientation or gender identity or expression to heteronormative or heterosexual. Those are the exact words. A huge side note: I find it very interesting that they would not simply outlaw the attempt to convert to any sexuality that was not the one that was innate to you, regardless of whether it was homosexual or heterosexual, or homonormative or heteronormative. While it may be that now it is potentially exclusively homosexuals and non-gender conforming individuals who suffered from this treatment of conversion therapy, that is no guarantee that in the future a heteronormative child would not be the next victim. And I know that there are people out there that will find that cautioning absolutely ludicrous, but even now there are parents claiming that their toddlers are transgender and are attempting treatment, which is a wildly speculative claim at best with what we know about gender development in children. It is then entirely possible that a heteronormative child born to gender non-conforming parents could be subject to conversion therapy and have it not be protected by this current law. More on that loophole later. And what about the individuals out there who would label anyone a transphobe if that person would not have sex with a transgender person? That's how the whole super straight movement started. An individual who was tired of being coerced and threatened by transgender individuals to have sex when he was not sexually attracted to them. To me, consistently telling someone that their sexuality is wrong and that they are transphobic for not wanting to have sex with a transgender person sounds an awful lot like free, non-institutionalized conversion therapy for the heteronormative people. Let's switch track just a smidge and also consider for a moment that sexuality for some has a degree of fluidity to it. I've known individuals that once starting hormone replacement therapy, their sexuality flipped. Once attracted to men, they became attracted to women after hormones and vice versa. That throws a spanner in the system of the argument that sexuality is fixed and determined perhaps before an individual is born. So how could we accurately say in all cases that someone is experiencing harmful conversion therapy if it's possible that their sexuality can indeed change? Just a little devil's advocate to try to get the gears turning. I think that we can all agree, though, that conversion therapy in general, the practice of trying to convert someone to a different sexuality than the one they currently and naturally exhibit, is morally wayward. Those who oppose Florida's bill are taking this concept as a shield, though, in an attempt to strike down what they have dubbed the Don't Say Gay bill, even though the two are not even remotely comparable. One deals with actively subjecting individuals to abuse in order to change their sexuality, while the other is barring sanctioned discussion within an educational setting regarding the topic. We're going to segue this musing as smoothly as a steamed breakfast tea by using the start of this 4-minute mainstream news media clip to both detail the Don't Say Gay bill and introduce you as gently as possible to the slimy manipulation tactics of the far left. So, a sip for serenity, and let us continue on.
The bill says that schools, quote, may not encourage classroom discussion about sexual orientation or gender identity in K through 12th grade or in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students. The bill does not actually define what is age appropriate.
So the quote, the bill may not encourage classroom discussion about sexual orientation or gender identity in primary grade levels or in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students. The bill does not define what is age appropriate. Let's look at these words very, very carefully. School staff may not encourage discussion. Just means that they are not to prompt the topic with a lesson or by bringing it up. But this does not stop students from discussing it amongst themselves and does not punish students for doing so. If bullying or other harmful behavior occurs, the staff member can step in and stop the abuse without discussing the topic. Keep that in mind, it's important for later. The language is intentionally vague by not defining when is age appropriate because that is easily open for interpretation with no hard science to support a hard number, and also varies from child to child. Courts exist partially to give a platform for arguments to be made before a judge to accommodate these individual circumstances and make the best decision given those unique details. The Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has shown support for this bill, saying,
he said in part that it was entirely inappropriate for teachers to be having conversations with students about gender identity. He goes on claiming that there have been instances where students have been told by different folks not to worry about picking their gender yet and then not telling their parents about these discussions. Finally, he said that the larger issue here is that parents need to have a seat at the table when it comes to what's going on in schools.
Now, the bill is only 4 pages long in double-spaced 12-point font with 2-inch margins. In other words, there isn't much excuse not to read the bill in order to develop a stance on it. Link to the bill in the description. The bill does 3 major things. 1, makes it necessary that parents be notified if there are any observed or documented changes to their child's mental, emotional, or physical health, and that parents be allowed unrestricted access to those records and information. That discussions about sexual orientation or gender identity not be encouraged by school staff in primary grade levels or at a point which is not age appropriate for students, and that parents reserve the right to seek legal action against schools who violate either of the previously mentioned amendments. Let's talk about the first part. Imagine for a moment that you are a parent with a child in public schools and the school is encouraging your child to withhold information from you regarding topics discussed in school and furthermore is not notifying you when your child is struggling with such a personal issue. Is that an environment that you want your child spending 8 hours a day, 5 days a week in? Now, the argument has already been posed by those that would still support this scenario that a homosexual child who tells the school counselor of their sexuality and their parents do not support this would then suffer abuse when that information was turned over by law to the parents, and that the child would have no one to turn to, which is a case of misdirection and telling of half-truths. The bill only states that the amendments apply only to primary grades in schools, and therefore children could still receive help from other sources. There are actually homosexually friendly religious institutions these days, as well as parents of friends and after-school clubs not associated with school. Public education is quickly taking upon itself the position of parenthood of the children who attend. And if the scope of the school's influence is not limited, with the amount of time children are forced to spend there, it is easy to see children influenced by the opinions and agendas of the staff, rather than being educated on basic essentials. The line between preparation and persuasion is very, very thin. So, do we allow schools to keep information about the students from their own parents for the occasional case of a homosexual child in an unfriendly home environment, or do we prevent the school from having the ability to make these decisions without consulting the parents? You'll notice this pattern also in the argument style of the far left, which is the appeal to emotion logical fallacy. They will bring up an argument that showcases someone being abused or disadvantaged, no matter how obscure or narrow the reference is, and use that as justification for their position without considering the weight of that argument in the larger picture, or outright manipulating it to make it seem like a larger concern. The number of homosexual individuals in an unsafe home environment is a small number compared to the entire student body whose information could be legally kept from the parents without this bill, and the staff untethered to what is appropriate or not to teach, also to the entire student body. The bill lastly provides for parents to pursue legal action if they can prove that their child is being subjected to the material, or that information regarding their child's mental, emotional, or physical health is being withheld, basically holding the school accountable for their actions, which is what law does. Let's move along here. Lots more manipulation to get to.
The official release from the White House here, conservative politicians in Florida advance legislation that is designed to target and attack kids who need support the most. LGBTQI plus students who are already vulnerable to bullying and violence just for being themselves.
And here, we have a classic case again of misdirection, sprinkled with galvanizing words of aggression like target and attack. If the bill had said, no discussion of specifically homosexual or non-gender conforming identities, then yes, I could agree that this was legislation targeting the LGBT community. Instead, remember that the language of the bill says sexual orientation and gender identity, which means that the bill applies to discussing all sexualities and all gender identities, including heterosexual and heteronormative. It would not extend to lessons on male and female biological anatomy, so sexual education could still be taught, just not sexuality. The bill is not at all targeting LGBT people, and simply states that these discussions do not belong in public schools in primary grades, which for most places are grades kindergarten through 7th grade, or roughly 12 to 13 years of age. And that age is worth noting because it leaves discussion of gender identity and sexuality open for 14-year-olds who are not even deemed mentally capable enough to operate a motor vehicle, while many people still don't know who they really are or even their sexuality by age 30. Anyway, the bill gives responsibility and choice of when those topics are to be discussed to the people who raised that child. Again, also notice in the previous clip how the appeal to emotion tactic is used by trotting out the bullied LGBT youth and insinuating that the bill encourages more bullying, which in fact it says nothing about. Remember, earlier I mentioned that staff members can absolutely step in and stop bullying if it happens. They simply just cannot start or encourage discussions, but those who wish to paint the bill in poor light would make it seem as though this option would no longer exist. Also called the false dichotomy logical fallacy, where only two options are spotlighted when in fact many more options also exist. Get ready for this next sneaky manipulation. It happens quick.
And this bill, of course, has a similar feature to the controversial Texas abortion law, SB 8. It encourages parents to bring lawsuits against educators if they believe sexual orientation was discussed in the classroom.
So, we've been talking about sexual orientation and gender identity discussion in the classroom, something that the far left supports. Did you catch what they did? Let me narrow it down and play it again.
And this bill, of course, has a similar feature to the controversial Texas abortion law.
They tied in another controversial and completely unrelated bill on abortion in Texas, a heated topic also supported by the left, with the common feature of supporting legal action to be taken by the people who are wronged, as if to say, and look, this other issue that you feel strongly about is also related in this very obscure way, and your rights are being violated. An emotional multiplier by hitting hot buttons, as well as a type of false equivocation fallacy. They double down by adding another misdirection here.
Here's just one example that could arise. Let's say a teacher has a student with same-sex parents. If that were to come up in the classroom, how could they possibly explain that?
Here's the answer. They don't. Why are teachers discussing the same-sex natured relationship of the student's parents in the first place? This is a case of if the question comes up, the answer is, go ask your parents. The entitlement that is being seen by teachers who take it upon themselves to educate outside their scope of study is deeply concerning. Now, is there such a thing as triple down? Because it happens here with the slippery slope fallacy.
This bill, it doesn't clearly define what is age or developmentally appropriate. So this could really pit parent against parent or create this society of snitches almost.
Again, is it really the school's concern what is going on between parents? And did I just hear them conjecture the creation of a society of snitches? Are snitches a professional argument? They are sure to cover themselves, though, by adding the word almost at the end of that sentence, though. A word that will surely be missed by anyone listening only for the anger addiction. And we're only halfway through this 4-minute news clip, and this is what people are consuming as reliable information, wondering why they feel so wound tight all the time.
That this basically sends a message to the LGBTQ community that their existence is so inappropriate here that it shouldn't even be discussed in the classroom. Keep in mind, there is already a high suicide rate in this community.
Again, the bill clearly says discussion is not to be encouraged by the staff regarding all sexual orientations and gender identities. The language is clear, and this is a blatant straw man argument of the proposal, grossly exaggerating the intent by saying it states LGBT kids themselves are inappropriate, which is not true. Just for added effect, they add in one more appeal to emotion and bring up the high rate of personally inflicted termination of life within this community, and state that if teachers and counselors are removed from the list of people the students can turn to, that this can make the problem worse. While yes, a student would no longer be able to discuss issues of sexuality and gender identity with school staff, the student can still bring it to the attention of the staff that there is an issue, and the parents would then be notified to be able to handle the issue as they see fit. Whether or not the parent is fit for handling the issue is an entirely separate debate. But the initial point is whether the situation, or any situation, is to be dealt with by the school or by the parent. If you're someone who believes that an institution is more of a fit parent than parents themselves, remember that when it's your own children in question, and consider that the school may not always agree with you. A decent litmus test for any line of logic is that if, when the tables are turned and the roles reversed, your answer then changes, it may be time to reevaluate your position.